Hey everyone, I'm John Bozick with Electric Bike Report, and today we're going to take a closer look at the first folding e-bike from Denago, which is aptly called the Folding Model 1. The goal of any folding e-bike is to provide a combination of performance, convenience, and versatility by functioning the same way as a non-folding e-bike while also collapsing down easily for storage or transport in a larger vehicle. Say you might live in an older home without a garage or a lot of closet space, or maybe you want to ride your bike to work and there's no place to park it except under your desk. Folding e-bikes like the Folding Model 1 here can make your life a lot easier. We've tested some other Denago e-bikes previously, so from those experiences, our biggest question was this: does the Folding Model 1 live up to our expectations of providing both power and portability? Let's take a look at some of the bike's most important features, and then we can go over its spec sheet and see how those things translated into real-world performance as we measured in our testing. Stay tuned. Before we get started, please take a moment to hit that subscribe button and the notification bell. This helps support the channel and makes it easier for you to see more of our content when we upload new videos. We are always talking about awesome e-bikes like the Folding Model 1, and we'd love to help you find the one that's just right for you. First things first, let's focus on the actual folding mechanisms on the Folding Model 1, since those are really the big highlight here. Denago claims that the bike can be collapsed in just 30 seconds, and with some practice, we were able to shave that down to around 20. Like many folding bikes out there, the Folding Model 1 has a hinge in the center of its frame, it has a collapsible stem, it has folding pedals, and it has a quick release clamp for the seat post, so you can either drop the saddle down fully or take the whole thing out. That main central hinge is one of the easiest and fastest mechanisms we've seen, but it still does a great job of securely holding the two halves of the bike together. In typical Denago fashion though, this thing has some serious oomph. There's a 500-watt rear hub motor that can bring you up to speed quickly and easily, and as a Class 2 and 3 e-bike, that means either 20 miles per hour by throttle or 25 miles per hour through pedal assist. This can help you to keep up with city traffic or just get you where you're going at a really fun pace. We'll talk more about the Folding Model 1's measured performance in our hill test section later, but I have to say that I was both really surprised and really impressed with its abilities, even in its low pedal assist settings. We test a lot of e-bikes that don't do so hot on hills until they get up to PAS 4 or 5, assuming they have that many settings, but on small or moderate hills, this thing ate them for breakfast, even in settings as low as PAS 2. There are, of course, a few features, or at least the side effects of features, that we'd love to see some improvement on, but we'll dive into more details about those later in this review. For now, let's move on to talk about the Folding Model 1 specs and components. So I talked a bit about the Folding Model 1's 500-watt rear hub motor previously. This is made by Shengyi, which isn't a brand we see a lot of, but they've been around for quite some time. That motor has a pretty solid 80 newton meters of torque, which is on the mid to high end, and that definitely comes into play with the bike's great acceleration and hill climbing ability. The bike's motor is powered by the removable battery we talked about earlier. It's a 48-volt, 672 watt-hour battery that delivers power quickly and efficiently, and also has a good capacity for a bike in this price range. We also like that it's fully recessed in the down tube, which is of course a step-through design that makes it easy to hop on and off the bike. We also have a 7-speed drivetrain with a pretty decent gearing range. There's a combination of a Shimano cassette and a microshift derailleur, both of which perform just fine for us. Now, the bike uses JAK mechanical disc brakes on 180 millimeter rotors. We weren't familiar with this brand, and we usually prefer to see hydraulic brakes, but honestly, these surprised us with their capabilities. We've got 20 by 3 inch Chaoyang tires with a pretty street specific tread pattern. Of course, the bike does not include any sort of suspension, so you're probably going to want to just stick to paved surfaces anyway. There's a box behind the seat post that might look like a battery, and there are plenty of folding bikes that do have batteries here, but just FYI, this is actually just the housing for the bike's controller. Moving on though, of course you can see that the bike includes some basic accessories like fenders and the rear cargo rack, which has a weight capacity of 35 pounds. That's a little less than we're used to seeing, but it's really cool that it comes with a nice bamboo deck board. That's something you usually have to buy separately. For reference though, 35 pounds will get you a couple of bowling balls so you can hit the lanes, or 140 sticks of butter in case you need to do a lot of baking. There's also a tail light with brake lights, and while we have ours off the bike for the moment, there's a headlight unit that mounts to the head tube too. These come standard at purchase, but there's some optional extras that can be added as well. An optional front rack mounts to the same location on the head tube and replaces the standard light. And then there's also a different headlight that can be purchased with the front rack, and that mounts to the front of it so you can still see ahead of you when it's getting dark. Next, let's talk about contact points, the saddle, pedals, and grips. I wasn't a huge fan of the saddle. I found it to be pretty far on the firm side, but of course that's personal preference and it's easy to change out. Those folding pedals we talked about are on the small side, but they're no different from what you'd see on most other folding bikes, and they do get the job done. The grips, on the other hand, are nice ergonomic rubber that I thought were really comfortable. We noticed that the reach on the folding Model 1 seemed a little on the far side from other folding e-bikes though, even for those of us in the office who are mostly around the 6 foot tall mark, and that also plays into the bike's handling that we'll talk more about later. The cockpit layout is pretty straightforward, no big bells or whistles. There is a small bell though on the front brake lever that I actually liked a lot. Otherwise, the left handlebar has the throttle lever and the small control panel. That control panel was fine, but I have to say I wasn't a huge fan of the throttle lever. It requires a larger motion to operate than I'm used to, and I didn't really dig the feel of it when holding it for long periods of time, but it's still something that most riders will appreciate having. Let's take a little tangent to talk about the throttle a bit more though. There are a couple of different types of throttle, both throttle on demand and throttle after pedal. Throttle on demand is the most common setup that works when the bike is completely stationary, while throttle after pedal requires the bike to already be in motion before it will engage. The folding Model 1 uses throttle after pedal, which in my opinion isn't as fun or easy to use, but Denago told us that they chose this as a safety feature to prevent the bike from accidentally revving up if you forget to turn it off before you fold it. And honestly, that seems like a pretty good idea to me. But anyway, back to the topic at hand. On the right handlebar, there's a micro shift trigger shifter that's thumb operated. This style of shifter is actually my personal favorite. It's fast and responsive, and both upshifting and downshifting use essentially the same motion, which for some reason just feels easier to me. Finally, we'll wrap up with the display. This one is a black and white screen, which is pretty basic, but I actually think it does a really good job of being easy to read and presenting the most important data in a really well-organized manner. So with that out of the way, let's take a closer look at how the bike folds. As with most folding e-bikes, the order of operations is sort of important here with the folding Model 1. You've got to have the cranks and the pedals in the right place, you've got to have the kickstand up, and then I like to start by releasing the main hinge. Both of the release levers on the main hinge and the stem use a lot of metal components, which I personally really appreciate just for peace of mind. Both also have a lock that just needs to be pressed or slid, and then the main levers can be released. Once the main hinge is open, you can fold the two halves of the bike together and rest the bike on the stand beneath the bottom bracket. Then with some strategic bracing, folding the stem down is pretty easy, although the hinge on our test bike was a little stiff. Finally, you can move on to the pedals, which just push in toward the frame and then flip up. Again, it's a pretty straightforward setup, but with some practice and repetition, you can get the folding Model 1 folded down and packed up in no time at all. I'll show you what the process looks like now, but I'll keep things slow so that it's easy to follow. And there we have it. One thing to note, the bike does weigh about 62 pounds, which is on the heavier side when it comes to folding e-bikes, so you're probably not going to want to lift and move this thing around multiple times a day, but you can save yourself some trouble by taking the battery out, which makes the frame significantly lighter. Also, in case you need to break out a tape measure to check your fit, the bike's folded dimensions are roughly 20 inches wide by 35 inches long by about 30 inches tall. Another thing before we move on, the collapsible stem here is a good inch or two taller than we typically see on folding e-bikes. It also telescopes for even more height, which allows the bike to fit riders between 5 feet and 6'1", although there are some trade-offs there when it comes to handling that we'll talk about later. With the speeds at which e-bikes are capable of traveling, it's crucial that they have effective brakes. To evaluate brake systems, we pedal every e-bike we test up to 20 miles per hour and then hit the brakes to stop as quickly as we can while still maintaining control. We measure the distance it takes the bike to stop, repeat the process 2 more times, and then calculate an average stopping distance from those results. We already talked a little bit about the Folding Model 1's mechanical disc brakes. Again, these are from JAK and they use 180 millimeter rotors. Our 3 sets of test data resulted in an average stopping distance for this bike of 19 feet 6 inches, which is just barely over our current average for folding e-bikes. Overall, we were really impressed with this performance. We didn't expect such good stopping power from this setup, so we don't think any changes or upgrades are needed here. The bike also handled well when braking. It felt nice and stable thanks to its 3-inch tires and low center of gravity. For our circuit test, we pedal every e-bike around a 1-mile loop made up of 4 right turns and a small 30-foot hill. We do this first with no assistance from the motor and then again in each pedal assist setting. This gives us an idea of the bike's motor engagement, its handling, and its speeds at those different PAS settings. So again, the Denago Folding Model 1 ships as a Class 2 and 3 e-bike with pedal-assisted speeds of up to 25 miles per hour. It has a 5-stage pedal assist system, so it has to distribute power and speeds between all of those settings. We were pretty satisfied with the bike's pedal ability without motor assistance. It's a little on the heavy side for a folding e-bike, but more in the middle for a standard e-bike. So in lower gears, it handled itself much better than we're used to with bigger, heavier bikes. We found that there wasn't a ton of assistance in the bike's lowest setting, PAS1. This isn't super uncommon, but I do think it would be nice to see a little bump here when Denago releases the Folding Model 2 in the future. Things got a lot better in PAS2 though. We started to see a more noticeable boost, and then the motor really did all the heavy lifting on that short uphill segment. From there, we found that the bike really did a great job of distributing power and speed, as you can see from the data. It's a nice linear progression, which means that it's easy to find the setting that works for you once you get a feel for the bike's capabilities. Overall, the Folding Model 1 had really solid acceleration. It builds smoothly and steadily when you're first starting out, and then if you bump up your PAS setting once you're moving, it actually has a pretty awesome kick, so be sure to hold on. We did notice that there was a good couple pedal rotations worth of lag when it came to re-engaging the motor after coasting or hitting the brakes, which wasn't as jarring as on some other bikes we've tested, but we definitely prefer to see a more sensitive cadence sensor with faster response time on the next iteration of the bike too. Now let's dive into the Folding Model 1's handling. Its 20-inch tires make the bike pretty nimble and maneuverable, but we also found its handling to be a bit twitchy, and that's due to a couple of things I alluded to earlier. First, with what feels like a pretty long reach, you lose a bit of stability the further your arms get from your body. And second, that extended stem that I mentioned is more flexible with that added inch or two in height. We've seen collapsible metal stems about this tall that didn't have so much flex, and also plenty of shorter plastic stems similar to this one, but that were also a bit less wobbly. So we think this bike would benefit from one or the other of those options to make its handling a little smoother. But overall, we were pretty happy with our findings from this test. Our range test is actually two separate trials where we pedal the bike until its battery runs out. The first test is done in the lowest pedal assist setting that provides constant input from the motor, and the second is done with maximum assistance. For each test, we measure the distance the bike was able to travel, and we compare that to the range advertised by the bike's manufacturer. So the Folding Model 1 is an unusual case here for a couple of reasons. First, that Denago doesn't outright advertise a range for the bike at this time, and second, that our results in both portions of this test were pretty similar. We reached out to Denago to ask about the bike's range, and they gave a nice conservative estimate of about 40 miles, which is pretty decent considering the Folding Model 1's battery capacity, its max speed, and the power of its motor. Also, after performing our circuit test and learning that the bike's first pedal assist setting was slightly less powerful than we hoped for, we decided to do our range test in PAS2 and PAS5. With all of that in mind, we ended up with a max assist result of 41.5 miles and a low power result of 49.6 miles. So it's reasonable to think that most users are going to land somewhere in the middle there, and that lines up pretty nicely with Denago's estimate. 40 to 50 miles should, at the very least, give you enough to cover a long commute or a full day of exploring a new city, and it's also to see a nice 3-amp charger for faster charging if you manage to burn through that many miles too, so we're pretty happy with the Folding Model 1's performance here. To test every bike's hill climbing ability, we take them to a local hill called Hellhole, which is a steep but paved path that's 1/3 of a mile long with an average grade of 12%. This is a pretty serious challenge for most e-bikes, and some that we test don't make it all the way to the top. We do this test both in the max pedal assist setting and with just the throttle to see if a bike has what it takes to make the climb. Here again, we have some pretty cool results when looking at the big picture. The Folding Model 1 did well with its throttle. It made a steady climb over 1 minute and 22 seconds with an average speed of 13.2 miles per hour. When we pedaled up in PAS5 though, this bike took our current top spot for a folding e-bike with a time of just 1 minute and 8 seconds and an average speed of 16 miles per hour. I mentioned earlier how this thing can power up hills surprisingly well in its second pedal assist setting, so we shouldn't have been surprised to see it conquer Hellhole as easily as it did in PAS5, but we were. This bike is a beast on hills, and it really just does all of the heavy lifting for you, so if you don't want to worry about getting slowed down when you hit an incline, you're really going to appreciate this bike's capabilities. At the beginning of this video, we asked the question, does this bike deliver on performance and functionality? And I think we've seen that the answer is a pretty definitive yes. The Denago Folding Model 1 isn't perfect. We think a shorter, less flexible stem would help to provide more consistent handling, and we'd like to see a more responsive cadence sensor for better motor re-engagement once you're on the move. But that said, we appreciate that the bike's current setup fits a pretty wide range of riders, and ultimately the bike is reasonably comfortable to pedal for those few seconds before its motor picks back up. On top of that, the bike delivers trademark Denago speed, which makes it really fun to ride and also very practical to get you where you need to go. It's got solid range, crazy uphill power, and on top of that, it folds and stores super quickly and easily. This bike really is a great blend of power and portability, so if you're looking for a fun and highly capable e-bike for going big but storing small, we think the Folding Model 1 is a good choice for you. Thanks for sticking with me through this review. If you'd like to read more about our experiences on the bike, please check out the link in the video description, which will take you to our written review at electricbikereport.com. We'll also leave a link to the Denago website where you can check current pricing on the Folding Model 1 and pick one up for yourself. Before we go, if you enjoyed the video, please like and subscribe if you haven't already. It really does help us to grow and share more content. We'd love to hear from you in the comments section too, so let us know if you have any questions and what you thought about our review. That's all for today. Again, I'm John with Electric Bike Report, and this is the Denago Folding Model 1.